All right, now we get to have a little bit of fun. I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be able to share some information that I think will be really hopeful, hopeful, helpful, and it's something that has been helpful in my life. And so, as you know, I always want our times whenever I get to do anything that I stand before you. I always want it to be helpful. I want it to be something that's useful to you. And so that's always important. Several months ago, I had the privilege to speak to our social workers, and I wrote kind of a talk that I shared with them that I want to adapt some of that information to be able to share with you, because I think it's very appropriate for what we're talking about. And so I just want to be an encouragement as always, because I love our team. I love the privilege to work with you every day. And, I look forward to going to work, and a lot of people don't have that opportunity. And so, as your chaplain and your friend and coworker, I just want to be an encouragement, because I don't think this will come as a surprise. What we do is hard, and sometimes it can be really trying, and it can be very emotional, and it can take a lot of things out. And so I always want to kind of give something that is very helpful to be able to do that. And so I've learned so much. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of wonderful folks with a lot of years of hospice. It makes me think of my twin, Pam, and I think we were separated at birth. We think scary alike, and Pam has been doing hospice, I think, since hospice begun. And a lot of people don't know it, that after Abraham Lincoln was shot, he lived for a little while. So he actually was the first one that was on hospice, and actually Pam was his nurse. And just kidding. She will probably get me for that. But I want to talk this morning about, or it's morning to me, it's actually lunchtime for you. But I want to talk about, what do we do with our weaknesses? What do we do with our failures? What do we do with the reality that none of us are really perfect? And so, with that in mind, I just want to kind of be a little bit vulnerable with you a little bit at times, and I want to share some things that I think you'll all understand, and I think you'll connect with, because none of us are perfect. And even as hard as we try, and we try to do things at a very high level, excellence is important. The reality is we're not perfect. And so I've written down three different truths that I think will help us to be able to identify those things, and hopefully will be something moving forward that will be helpful for you. Number one, when we talk about professional growth, because that's what we all want. We all kind of start at a level, and as we continue to go, we want growth. We want growth in our lives, spiritually, physically. All those different kinds of things are really important. But when we think about it from a professional stand, whether we're a nurse's assistant, whether we're a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, administration, all of those different kinds of things, we want to grow in those roles. And so I want to give you some help in those areas. First of all, professional growth develops through recognizing the existence of weakness. I think that's important for us to understand that we all have weak areas in our lives. I think it's important, once we begin to realize those kinds of things, that we need to learn to laugh at ourselves. Sometimes we get all frustrated and those things. And listen, our weaknesses, if we really take a hard look at them, they can be pretty funny. And I love this quote. It says, "The human race has only one really effective weapon, and that is laughter." The benefit of laughter are instantaneous. There's a great deal of evidence that tells us that laughing improves both our mental and physical health. For example, research shows laughter greatly reduces stress while strengthening our immune system. In the process, thus, laughter not only reinforces social bonds, it's essential to our survival. when life gets tough, laughter is often the only thing that makes us feel better. We love to laugh, and how many times have we said it around the desk that we don't oftentimes think that without those times of laughter, that whether we'd even be able to do what we do, because there are those times where it's difficult, and there are times that we just do, silly things even out of our weakness, and it's good to be able to laugh at ourselves because, I really believe that ignoring the fact that we have weaknesses can be really damaging. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. I think we have to look at who we are and understand that we have weaknesses. That's how God made us. And I think that everything around us, our social environment and those things, kind of tell us not to do those things because a lot of times we're embarrassed. Let's be honest. You do something and you look at yourself and go, wow, I just can't believe I don't want anybody to know that. But and sometimes we think, well, if I have a weakness and if somebody sees those things, or if I let my guard down a little bit, then there's the fear that maybe I won't be accepted by my peers, and of course, pride. We don't really want others to know our deepest and darkest secrets a lot of times. And so when we have weaknesses, a lot of time our pride says, you know what, you don't want people to know that about you, or those kinds of things. And so it's natural, it's human nature for us to hold on to those things and not want people to really know our weaknesses. But when you work with someone long enough, those weaknesses are going to come out because they're part of us, just like our strengths. You work with someone for very long and you're going to realize their strengths, you're going to realize their weaknesses, and it's just reality of who we are and how God made us. And so I just think sometimes it's good to just be able to laugh and enjoy those kinds of things, because if we ignore weaknesses, how can we ever improve in that area of our lives? I mean, we have to be honest to be able to look at those kinds of things so that we can make some changes. Several years ago, matter of fact, I believe the year was 1986. It was one of those landmark moments that in our lives that we all remember where we were at the time that it happened. And so I believe it was January. I could be wrong, but January of 1986, I believe, was whenever the Challenger explosion happened upon takeoff. And we all know that story. It's been woven into our lives for those of us. Sorry, Natalie, you probably don't remember that because I don't think you were born. But anyway, those of us who were alive at that time, it was one of those almost like a 9/11 moment for our nation. And, as the story came out, there was an engineer who the night before the liftoff had warned NASA officials that there was a problem and that they felt that they should delay. And of course, that problem was with one of the O-rings. And because of pressure from the person from NASA, said, what are we going to do? Are we going to delay a launch every time that we have a little thing? It's not that big of a deal. Is it really that big of a deal? And the engineer who had brought the problem, relented and gave in and said, okay, I'll go ahead and sign off. And of course, the next morning, we know the terrible tragedy that happened, that all could have been avoided for, I believe, a 69-cent O-ring was the problem. And I bring that out because the idea is if they would have just realized the weakness that was there, all of that catastrophe could have been avoided, and honesty, just true honesty about that, would have prevented the disaster. And so I think the same is true when we begin to truly understand weakness, that we can begin to have real confidence in who we are. This idea of kind of being comfortable in our own skin, we are who we are, and many of our weaknesses, even though that we can improve them, they may never go away. They always may be a part of who we are, and so I think it's important for us to embrace those and to be able to improve and to be honest about those kinds of things. The objective that I want to share then is identifying weakness leads to discovering strengths. it becomes a confidence in who we are. We understand who we are better than anybody else. And once we get a hold of those, we truly understand. Now I want to share something that isn't going to be new news to any of you all, because some of you have worked with me for as long as 7 years. But I was born with a serious vision issue. My issue of being legally blind is from birth. It's a birth defect. What I see normally, I see clear, but the best way that I always describe it, what you can see clearly at 200 feet, I have to be within 20 feet to be able to see it at the same level that you do. Now, when I was young, um, I was really bitter, really angry, and I never really understood why God allowed me to be like that. And I was angry, and oftentimes I would say, you know what? Why do I have to work twice as hard as anyone else just to get to the same place? And for the longest time, it was just one of those things. I wouldn't ever let anybody know. I would fake it. As y'all know, I'm pretty good at faking. Until somebody sees me read, they don't really know that I have a problem. But I would try to hide it. I'd try to do anything that I could because I didn't want people to know. Because if that was the first thing that they knew about me, I felt like they were going to judge me and never give me an equal opportunity. And so all the way into my ministry, I was 30 years old when I went to, or when I finally went to seminary, but I knew that God had called me into the ministry when I was 16, 17 years old. I just knew that. And I fought it because I told God time and time again, I said, there's no way, I have a difficult reading. I'll never be able to drive. All of those different kinds of things that are going to be a problem, going to be a hindrance for me being in the ministry. So I need to do something else, Lord. And I remember when the Lord put upon my heart and he said, do you really think that I didn't know your situation when I called you? And the reality of understanding that God called me even amongst my weakness, it became a strength for me to understand, you know what? God can use those weaknesses. He just the way he uses our strengths. And I remember after reading over in 2 Corinthians about Paul talking about his weakness, whatever it is, we don't really know, but time and time again he asked God to remove it. And some people, a lot of scholars believe that his was a vision issue. We don't know that. Could have been lots of different things, but whatever it was something that he described as being tormenting to him. And he begged God to take it away, and God told him every time, no. Said, you know what? When you're weak, that is when I'm strong. And when I began to understand that concept, I remember thanking God for making me the way that he did, because I truly believe if I would have been born with full sight, I don't know that I ever would have given in to the call of ministry. I don't know that I ever would have had those moments of where I think I'm very tender because I understand and empathize in some things that other people. God allowed me to go through some things to make me who I am. And he's done the same thing for you. Your weaknesses are part of you. And the reality is he wants to use those for your strength. And so that's important. Number 2, personal growth develops through recognizing the purpose of weakness. It's important to understand that everything that we experience in life helps to develop who we are. Now, some of those things are positive, some of those things are negative, and oftentimes we may even think that some things that don't really even matter. Everything affects us, and those things change us and mold us. It's kind of like the idea of a sculpture that starts off with a big chunk of granite. In the beginning, he begins to knock great chunks of that rock off, but by the time he may spend 90% of the time just chiseling little bitty pieces here and there that are making the sculpture what it's going to be. And the same thing is true whenever we think about our development. There is a purpose in weakness, because that's exactly what it's doing. It's molding us. It's making us into who we are. So our objective for number 2 is identifying weakness leads to healthy dependence. If you don't understand this concept, you need to get it right now. You will never, ever be able to survive alone. within the workforce, within your family, within your social realms. You need people. I tell our students all the time how much that we need each other. The important thing is, you know what? Outside of our realm, people don't care whether you succeed or whether you fail. Matter of fact, in the world, it's all about me. And so I want you to understand that your dependence on others is important. One of my favorite television shows that's been out the last couple of years deals with a young man who has autism, and the pride and all of those kinds of things that come along with him as being in the medical field. But it's a beautiful thing to watch, even in his weakness, that he has purpose, and everything that he does is important. And he's got people around him that come along, and they add value and they add help to what he's doing, and he can succeed in that realm. Guys, I oftentimes share this. I am so blessed. Rarely ever, for instance, I don't drive. It is very rare that I ever ask someone for a ride because I have so many friends that respect and care for me that time and time, every week, people ask me, can I help you? We need people. And you need to understand that when you value others, even in your weakness, there are those that want to come around. They care for you, especially on the unit. Listen, we're a team, and so it's important for us to know how much that means to be able to step in and to be able to help someone. Number 3, professional growth develops through recognizing the process of weakness. Acceptance of who we are is an important process within our lives. How many times do we talk about in a family's life how important it is for them to get peace through acceptance of just things? The same is true within our weakness. As I said earlier, those things may or may change, may or may not change. We don't really know, but we have a tendency a lot of times, rather than accepting those things, we get really down on ourselves and we have a poor self-image, and we begin to look, oh, well, I can't do anything right. How many times do you hear people say that? Or, well, I'm no good, I'm not even useful in this. And that's just not true. God gives each of us gifts and abilities, and they all work together in a team map. Where I'm strong, someone else may be weak, or where I'm weak, someone else may be strong, and those come together and connect and make a difference. And so, don't be so hard on ourselves, because life is full of failure. Everybody gasp. Failure? Does it really, really happen? It happens. It happens a lot. And in our situation, it's good to admit and understand that those things happen. I want to share some of my favorite failure stories that turned out well. You've all heard of Sir James Dyson. Well, maybe you haven't heard of him or not, but Mr. James is the one who actually invented the Dyson vacuum system. What you may or may not know about him, he had 5,126 failed prototypes before he came up with that which would actually work. Here's one of my favorites, Steven Spielberg, Jaws, many, many other movies. Well, Mr. Spielberg was rejected twice for entry into the USC film school. Wouldn't you like? I doubt they put that on their brochures. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, he was said whenever he was in school that he was too stupid to learn by his instructor, and yet by the end of his life he had over 1,000 patents. Now, of course, my favorite, my beloved Walt Disney, who I think is really, really important, and we should hold on to his life because we can learn a lot. Anyway, as you know, he started out in the newspaper business. His dad owned in that area, but he actually once had an editor that told him, get this and hold on to this, Walt, you're going to need to find something to do that fits you, because, well, you just don't really lack imagination. Think they might have missed that just a little bit. Albert Einstein, reading whenever he was at 7, he was thought to be mentally handicapped, and yet he won a Nobel Prize in physics. J.K. Rowling, you may not recognize that name, but she was the one that wrote the Harry Potter series. Before she wrote the first one, she was broke, depressed, a single mom, and now she's one of the richest women in all the world. She wrote this quote, one of my favorite quotes, said, "It is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default." Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all life. I don't want to hear Shaq. I don't want to hear, James, any of those. Michael's still the man. As you know, his sophomore year in high school, he was cut off of his high school team, and then he became the greatest player. Wouldn't you like to be that coach? In his biography, he wrote these words: "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. On 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game winning shot, and I missed it. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." The objective, identifying weakness, leads to proper balance. It's kind of like humility in action. Guys, these three principles are important. I want to share one last story with you, and then I want to give some encouragement. Um, Many, many years ago, when my wife and I were first married, so it would have been in the mid 80s, we grew up in Oklahoma, and we used to go to a place called Table Rock Lake outside of Branson, a place that we love. It's very, very beautiful. If you've ever been to Disney, I know I just had to throw that in. There are lots of ways to get around Disney. You, first of all, can take the monorail, which is wonderful. You can take a bus, which is a way to get around. And you can also take boats. There are boats literally that go between the parks and all of those different kinds of things. And if you ever go to the ticketing and transferring center, you have a choice to do any of those. And I typically, if I'm going to go to Magic Kingdom, I almost always choose to do the boat. And the boat backs up there. It's a huge boat. You just go from the ramp and you walk on. They put a little chain up now, and it takes you over, and it's just a beautiful view of the Poly and Grand Floridian. And anyway, it's just a wonderful moment that I might be doing when you're watching this. But anyway, Table Rock Lake years ago actually had a ferry similar to that. And I had gone over to one side, because I wanted to look at something, but I needed to get back quickly. And the reality was, if I didn't get back, my wife was on the other side, and we had a reservation that night, and the boat only ran about once every hour, and I wasn't about to walk around the lake, and so I would have had to wait, and I would have been late, and it would have been bad. And so anyway, as I was going down, it was a kind of a downward walk down to the dock, and lo and behold, I looked as I got close enough, and that boat was about 5 or 6 feet already off the shore. And I thought, oh no, this is not good. So I thought to myself, you're young, you're athletic, you are the man. And so I began taking off, running down, and I was running, sprinting. And the little guy that kind of helps people get on, he saw me coming, and he was going, no, no, no. Of course, I thought, halt, man. I'm going to do what I do. You don't understand. I am not missing this boat. And so I took a great leap, and I flew through the air, and I landed on the edge, and the boat that was full of people, they began to applaud. And it was one of those moments that I wished we would have had on camera. And then the little man looked at me, and he said, "Sir, you know this boat's coming into the shore, right?" Oh, yeah, yeah. No, okay. So I just kind of sat over in the corner as everybody left and exited, and I felt silly, and now I can laugh about it. But failure. We all make mistakes. We all do stupid things. And I guess what I want us to understand in our weakness, that's just part of life, and it's important. And so, As we conclude, I want to just be an encouragement to you. I want you to know how much that I love you and I appreciate you. And so I want to remind you why what you do is important. First of all, what you do matters. Every single day, you get to pour yourselves into lives of families. And time again, you may or may not hear all of their stories. I get to hear a lot of stories. I get to see people. Matter of fact, I went to my friend's mom's visitation, and that entire family came up to me and was naming our staff to me. Will you please tell them how much that I love them? I appreciated what they did. What you do truly matters. I know you get tired. I know you get frustrated. I know we all get tired of different things that change and all of those kinds of things. But hospice is about making those who need it the most feel that they're loved and cared for, because everyone that we deal with, including those who are very difficult, including those who might have a little bit of the crazy, and y'all know what I'm talking about, all of them deserve to have someone on their side willing to fight for them and to give them what they need in their end of life. You give value to people's lives. That's one of the first things I always share with families. We want to love your family member. We want to value them. We want to respect them, give them the dignity that they certainly deserve. And by the way, some of those people at death maybe have had none of that in life. And so we have the privilege to do that. Number two, what you do matters because someone who can't be heard needs a voice. You're their advocate. You stand in the gap and you improve those lives. You help those family members. You're there. And the very last thing I want to leave you with is because you are called. You've been here long enough to understand that those who are not called to do what we do, they don't last very long. God made you who you are. He gave you gifts. He gave you ability. He called you to do what you do. And I can promise you, if you're not called, this will be the most frustrating job that you have ever had in your life. But if you are called, it's the most fulfilling and will bring contentment to you like you have never experienced. And so I encourage you, keep doing what you're doing. What you do really matters. Here's how I want to close. And I hope Natalie will give you the opportunity to do this. But I want you to do a group exercise. I want you to take groups of 3 or 4, and I want you to share sometime in your life, maybe even within your work within the hospice ministry, where you just had to laugh at yourself and to take at that. Maybe it's back to something when you were in school or whatever. Maybe it's a family moment. But just spend the next few minutes just share an instance where you were able to laugh at yourself. Share that with the group. It'll be healthy for you. It'll be healthy for them. Thank y'all so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I know I will. Love y'all.